So I think it's fair to say that the Battlefield community has always been a little bit iffy on the idea of Battle Royale being included in a Battlefield game, whether that be when they announced Firestorm for Battlefield 5 way back in 2018, or in the lead up to 2042 where it seemed like we might get another BR, or even now in Battlefield 6 where it is essentially confirmed now that we will be getting a Battle Royale at some point down the line. As a long-time Battlefield fan since Bad Company 2 and even earlier than that playing some of the older games like Battlefield 2, but also as a genuine BR addict who has actually fallen in love with that genre over the past 7 or 8 years, I wanted to weigh in with my 2 cents on the BR being added to Battlefield 6, both the pros and the cons, and whether or not this is actually a good thing for Battlefield's future. Now, I think the best place to start when it comes to this whole conversation is essentially talking about why the Battlefield community seems to not really want a BR added to the game, because that is pretty much the biggest talking point whenever this topic comes up. It seems like a lot of people adamantly don't want it, at least within the Battlefield community anyway, while on the outside a lot of people are really craving a Battlefield BR. So some people may be kind of curious as to why the sort of core Battlefield community doesn't really want it. Now, I think a part of that is that, in a way, the Battlefield community is kind of old school. There are a lot of people that have been playing this franchise for decades at this point, and a lot of those people sort of don't like change, which is understandable. We have a franchise that has always done things a little bit differently than games like Call of Duty and those more sort of mainline, bigger games, I guess. And it's always had its own identity, and so whenever things change, like for example 2042, and even a little bit with Battlefield 5 and even Battlefield 1, which I consider to be a great game, but a lot of people did have issues with it. A lot of it comes down to the franchise slightly changing, and the sort of old school fan base often doesn't like that, which, even though I'm not really in that boat, I do understand that point of view. On top of that though, there are also a lot of people that just feel Battle Royale has no place in Battlefield. Battlefield's always been about like conquest and rush, and now in more recent games, breakthrough. And it's not so much the game where we want the quote-unquote gimmicky modes like a Battle Royale, or in 2042, the absolute abomination that was Hazard Zone. To me personally, I think those are some of the main reasons as to why a lot of people don't want it. There are some others which I'll get into in a second when I talk about how I actually think this could negatively impact Battlefield. But I think when it comes down to the main sort of reasons as to why people don't want it, a big chunk of that is just simply people don't want change. We want the game to go back to its roots, and obviously this game's roots did not include a Battle Royale. But moving on to how a Battle Royale could actually hurt Battlefield, and this is a big thing that I almost was going to include in why people don't want it, because it is brought up quite often. This is the fact that if this game's Battle Royale is ultra successful, in a weird way, it could actually unintentionally hurt the game by pretty much taking the focus away from the core game itself, where the developers, and especially EA, usually this stuff comes from the top, they may essentially see the Battle Royale as now the focus moving forward, because obviously if it does really well, it's going to bring them a lot of money, and in turn that can unintentionally hurt the main game, because they then start pulling resources from the all-out warfare area of the game. Now, to some that might sound like a conspiracy theory, or it's not actually going to happen, but this happened with Warzone. Warzone did the exact same thing to Call of Duty, where all of the focus shifted from the 6v6 modes, which is what made Call of Duty famous in the first place. But when Warzone absolutely took off in 2020, all of that focus shifted over to Warzone, meaning that the core Call of Duty community felt pretty neglected when Warzone was getting more content and updates than the main game itself, especially when you consider the fact that the main game is actually paid, so those people are paying for that product, whereas Warzone is free, and that is seemingly getting more content than those who paid for the game. Now, that is a real concern when it comes to this Battle Royale as well. If it is ultra successful, on one hand, that's really good, and I'll get into the pros for that in a second, but on the flip side, it can hurt the game in the long run, provided EA don't play it really smart, where they still put a lot of focus into the core game while also working on the BR. If they don't get that balance right, it can really, really negatively impact not only this Battlefield, but essentially the entire future of the franchise. Now, on the flip side of it too, even talking about if the game isn't successful, not so much the main game, but if the BR itself isn't successful, that is still taking away resources from the main game. And so it's almost like a lose-lose to a lot of people, where if the Battle Royale is really successful, that could hurt the game. And if it's not successful, we're all just going to be sitting here thinking, imagine if all those man hours went into the core experience of Battlefield instead of being split across the campaign, across multiplayer, Portal, and then also the Battle Royale. And so on one hand, there is actually no winning from this for a lot of people, because it's either wildly successful and it ruins the future of the franchise, or it's a fail and those resources could have just been put into the main game to make it even better. Now, before we get into the positive side of this, if you guys are new to the channel and you're interested in more Battlefield 6 content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more content like this, both in the lead up to launch, and there will be a hell of a lot of content after launch too, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, in terms of what a Battle Royale could do positively for Battlefield though, because there is a good side to this, and I think a lot of people don't see this, they only see the negatives, which again, I understand if you're not a BR fan, then I can understand that, but there is some really big positives, at least if this is done properly anyway. A really well done Battle Royale that doesn't completely steal the focus could actually be the franchise defining moment where Battlefield finally solidifies itself as a franchise just as big as games like Halo, Call of Duty, hell, even Fortnite, if it ever got that successful. And while that is obviously easier said than done, there is a world in which I can see this game having a phenomenal BR that is arguably one of the best that's ever been made, because if they can do everything right and then bake that into what we experienced in the beta that felt really good, then there is actually some insane potential there. Now, the most important part to this as well is that a successful free-to-play element of Battlefield would actually bring in so many new players. That's something that we haven't experienced yet, because we've only seen these quote-unquote free-to-play elements in Firestorm, which wasn't free-to-play. It should have been, but it definitely wasn't free-to-play, and that was why that pretty much was an astronomical fail. And then there was Hazard Zone, which just never panned out. It was just never supported, and realistically was never going to do well. And so if they can actually land that free-to-play element to the game, it would bring in so many new players. They do have a lot of trust to gain back from not just the Battlefield community, but the FPS community in general. And behind a paywall, a lot of people aren't going to want to buy into that. However, if there is a free element, a lot of people are going to see all this hype and go, you know what, I'm just going to download it, see if I like it. And I'm pretty certain a lot of people are really going to enjoy this game. Now, some people also weirdly see that as a negative. A lot of people in this community, for some reason, tend to gatekeep Battlefield, which I personally find really weird, if I'm being honest. We all came from somewhere else, so I have personally got no issues with new players coming from other franchises. If there's someone who's played Call of Duty their whole life, they've never played Battlefield, and this is their first Battlefield game, I don't look down on them and go, ew, Call of Duty player. I think that's awesome that people are going to come over and try a franchise that we all love. So I heavily disagree with that whole gatekeeping nonsense that seems to happen in this community for some reason. It's not just Battlefield, but I feel like Battlefield is pretty damn bad with that, where the community, like I said earlier, they are very old school. We've all been playing this game for a long time, and for some reason that leads to a lot of people gatekeeping. But to me, that's not a real thing. That's not what real people do. And to me, more players is always a good thing. On top of more players though, a successful BR could bring in more revenue for Battlefield, which first and foremost, I want to say I could not care less how much money the game makes. I don't think EA needs more money, and I don't think any of you think that either, but it is a business at the end of the day, and more revenue from Battlefield means more investment from EA, which is at the end of the day good for us. And so although none of us care about how much money the game makes, I don't think anyone personally gives a shit about that, it is still good for the game. In fact, it's imperative that this game is financially successful, because then they will continue to back it and they will continue supporting the game, compared to if it's an absolute fail, or even if it's a decent game but it just underperforms, then eventually they will just cut support and they'll just keep doing the same thing over and over again, like they've done with the Battlefront games, Battlefield 5, and eventually 2042, where they kind of cut them off a little bit early, and it leaves us as the community a little bit frustrated with them every single time. Now, something else that I think is really important though, if they do go down this path of sort of focusing on the Battle Royale, is I think that they really do need to innovate. I think that they need to avoid just making this another, typical BR. If they essentially just make Warzone but Battlefield, to me that isn't probably good enough unless it's just perfectly balanced and it just plays really well, then maybe. But to me, I do think that they need to innovate a little bit, which I really think that they can. Now, there's a few areas just baked into the game that already sort of count as innovation. For example, destruction. That is innovation within the BR genre that hasn't really been done before, or at least not properly anyway, outside of essentially Firestorm. That was the first one to really do destruction, and it did it pretty well, but obviously that was just a flop, so that almost doesn't really count. We haven't actually had a proper AAA BR that has been really successful, that has made the most of destruction, and so that is one area where this BR can really sort of set itself apart from games like Warzone and Apex and all of the other BRs out there. There's also been leaks surrounding the oversight system, which seems to be a system where dead players can actually still impact the game. So you can fly drones, you can man turrets and stuff like that. And so even if you're dying, you're still involved in the game, and it means it is a little bit less boring if you die. And to me, an innovation like that would be really, really good. I even think they could try to somehow implement classes into the Battle Royale, which I'm not really sure how that would work, to be honest, but I think if they could manage to pull that off, it could be a really, really good innovation. Don't get me wrong, it could also just not change the game whatsoever, so I don't know if that would definitely innovate, but that is something that they could try and set themselves apart yet again. And like I said, if it's done properly, that could be a really big addition to this Battle Royale. So I guess to sort of summarize with my own take on this, as much as this may annoy a lot of you hardcore Battlefield fans, and keep in mind, again, I am a hardcore Battlefield fan. I've been playing for well over a decade now, and I've played probably 90% of the games in the franchise, so I'm just as certified as anyone else is out there. But my take on this is that honestly, I am actually all for the Battle Royale, but only if it doesn't negatively impact the game. I think that all-out warfare and just the core Battlefield experience needs to be elite, and it needs to get back to being the best that we've seen in Battlefield. Whether it can reach the heights of Battlefield 3 and 4, who knows, and most likely that won't be the case. But it seems like they are really on track, at least from the beta, and if they can maintain that while also adding a really good BR on top of that, then to me, I am absolutely stoked with that, and I think that it just makes the overall package even better, despite whether or not the core Battlefield community really wants it. The good thing is, if you don't want it, you don't have to play it, and like I said, as long as it doesn't negatively impact the main game, I don't see how that really affects anyone, because like I said, if you don't like it, simply don't play it. My only requirement from DICE and from EA is just to make sure that they do not take away from the main game though, because if this does go the way that Warzone went, where yes, we get a really good BR, but then in the next Battlefield it's just not as good because they're not even focused on that, they're just focused on the Battle Royale, then in that case I don't really want it. But I'm hoping that they can learn from what has gone wrong with Call of Duty, and Byron Bede is even a part of this, who worked on the initial version of Warzone. So hopefully he can sort of help avoid that situation as well, because I don't think that's something that anyone wants, especially after they seem to have actually brought Battlefield back from pretty much the brink of death at this point. But that is my take on the whole Battle Royale scenario. I'm keen to hear all of your thoughts. I know that the comments section is going to be a bit of a war zone. Lots of different opinions are no doubt going to be flying around. So keep it civil, guys, but I am keen to hear all of your thoughts. Whether you are for BR, against it, whether you agree or disagree with whatever I've said, I am keen to get that discussion going. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.